This story is titled, After My Girlfriend Cheated on Me, She Demanded I Give Her My Apartment and Credit Card, so I threw her belongings out on the street and burned all our photos together. Subreddit. I've been lurking on this platform for years, but I finally decided to share the complete story of my last relationship because the level of entitlement and manipulation I experienced was absolutely mind-blowing. Grab some snacks because this is going to be a wild ride that spans nearly a decade of my life. My name is Tyler, and I'm a 30-year-old guy who just escaped what I can only describe as a financial and emotional hostage situation disguised as a romantic relationship. I met my ex-girlfriend Madison back in college when we were both broke students trying to figure out our lives. I was grinding through a demanding computer science degree, pulling all-nighters in the lab and surviving on energy drinks and determination. Madison was pursuing a communications major, which seemed like a much more relaxed path compared to my constant coding marathons. We initially bonded over cheap Taco Tuesday dates and those endless study sessions where we'd camp out in the library until they kicked us out at closing time. Looking back, those early days were actually pretty sweet and normal. We were both struggling financially like most college students, so splitting the cost of a $5 meal felt like a romantic dinner. The red flags were there from the beginning, but they were subtle enough that I didn't notice them buried under the excitement of young love. My best friend Connor, who's 31 and has always been brutally honest about everything, warned me about Madison from the very first time he met her at a house party during our sophomore year. After watching her interact with people for about an hour, he pulled me aside and said, "Dude, she's definitely attractive, but I'm getting serious future vampire vibes from her. Like she's going to drain you dry financially and emotionally." At the time, I just laughed it off and told him he was being paranoid and judgmental. I should have listened to my guy from day one, but hindsight is 20/20. Our relationship during the college years followed a pretty standard pattern that most student couples experience. We'd hang out between classes, grab cheap food from the campus dining hall, and spend entire weekends holed up in my tiny dorm room watching Netflix and pretending to study. Even back then, I noticed that Madison rarely paid for anything. But I rationalized it because everything was so inexpensive anyway. A movie ticket was $8, dinner was $12, and gas money was maybe $20 for the whole week. It didn't seem like a big deal at the time, and I actually enjoyed being able to treat her. After graduation, our paths diverged pretty dramatically in terms of career stability and financial responsibility. I managed to land a solid developer position at a growing tech company with good benefits and room for advancement. The work was challenging but rewarding, and I was finally making real money for the first time in my life. Madison, on the other hand, seemed to just float from one job to another without any clear direction or commitment to building a career. The pattern that would define our entire relationship started almost immediately after college ended. She'd get hired for marketing positions that seemed promising on paper, but then she'd find reasons to hate every single job within a few months. First, she'd complain that her boss was toxic or that the company culture wasn't a good fit for her personality. Then she'd quit without having anything else lined up, which would leave her unemployed and broke. During these unemployment periods, she'd spend her time complaining about being financially stressed while simultaneously making no real effort to find new work or improve her situation. The career disasters started rolling in like clockwork right after we graduated. Madison's first real job was at a marketing agency that seemed like it could have been a great opportunity for someone starting their career. However, she immediately began complaining that her boss was toxic and the work environment was unbearable. After just 8 weeks on the job, she quit without any notice or backup plan. When I asked her what specifically made the boss toxic, she couldn't give me any concrete examples beyond bad vibes and micromanagement when he asked her to actually show up on time. Next came a stint at a tech startup that I thought would be perfect for her, since she was always talking about wanting to work somewhere innovative and creative. But that didn't last long either because, according to Madison, the company culture wasn't a good fit for her personality. When I pressed her for details, it became clear that the real issue was that they expected her to work more than 30 hours a week and occasionally stay late during busy periods. The concept of putting in extra effort during crunch time was apparently completely foreign to her. Her third attempt was a position as a social media manager for a local business, which seemed tailor-made for someone with her communications background and love of Instagram. That job ended abruptly because they allegedly didn't appreciate her creative vision and were stifling her artistic expression. The reality, which I pieced together from her complaints, was that they asked her to follow their established content calendar and brand guidelines instead of just posting whatever random photos and captions she felt like sharing. The audacity of expecting consistency and professionalism was apparently too much for her to handle. Throughout all of these career false starts, I somehow ended up covering an increasingly larger portion of our shared expenses. It started innocently enough. I was making good money at my developer job, and she was struggling to find her footing professionally. I covered about 80% of our rent, all the utilities, groceries, her phone bill, car insurance, and even helped with her student loan minimum payments during the months when she was unemployed. On top of these basic living expenses, I was also expected to fund what she called her self-care routine, which included weekly nail appointments that cost $60 each, monthly hair treatments that ran $200, and shopping sprees where she'd drop $600 on clothes she'd wear exactly once before, deciding they weren't her style anymore. The vacation planning was another source of financial stress that I didn't fully recognize at the time. Madison would research and book elaborate trips without consulting me about the budget or even asking if I could afford them. She'd present these vacations as fait accompli, already booked and paid for with my credit card, and then act hurt and confused when I expressed concern about the cost. According to her logic, I worked hard and deserved nice things, so I shouldn't worry about spending money on experiences that would make us both happy. This financial bleeding happened so gradually that I barely noticed how extreme it had become. It started with small requests like, "Babe, can you spot me for dinner tonight? I'll get you next time." Of course, next time never actually came. Then it escalated to, "I'm a little short on rent this month. Can you cover the difference?" The difference grew larger each month until I was essentially paying for everything, while she contributed nothing but complaints about how stressed she was about money. During Connor's weekly gaming sessions at my apartment, he'd notice Madison's latest designer purchases and make pointed comments about my financial situation. He'd look at the new designer handbag sitting on the kitchen counter, or watch her walk in carrying multiple shopping bags from expensive stores, and whisper sarcastically, "I see your 401k is doing well." She'd strut around the apartment in her designer stilettos, carrying her Louis Vuitton purse like she was starring in her own personal reality show, completely oblivious to the fact that I was funding her entire lifestyle while my own savings account dwindled. I'd tell Connor to shut up and mind his own business, but deep down I knew he was absolutely right. The red flags were multiplying faster than I could ignore them, but I was too busy playing Captain Save-A-Ho to notice how manipulative and entitled Madison had become. I kept making excuses for her behavior and convincing myself that she just needed time to figure out her career path, when the reality was that she had no intention of ever supporting herself financially. Beyond the financial manipulation, Madison's jealousy and controlling behavior reached levels that would make the NSA jealous. She monitored my social media activity with an obsessive attention to detail that was honestly kind of scary. Every like, every comment, every tagged photo was subject to intense scrutiny and interrogation. I couldn't interact with any female colleagues or friends without facing a full-scale inquisition about my motives and relationships. The breaking point came when a female coworker tagged me in what was possibly the most innocent group photo in the history of social media. It was taken at a work conference and literally just showed 15 of us standing there looking awkward and uncomfortably business casual in our matching company polo shirts. We looked about as sexy and threatening as a middle school math team. But Madison absolutely lost her mind when she saw the notification. She started blowing up my phone with calls and texts for hours, demanding that I FaceTime her immediately to prove that I wasn't hiding someone in my hotel room. When I tried to explain that it was just a work photo and completely innocent, she escalated to full paranoid conspiracy mode. She made me block the coworker on every single social media platform, delete her contact information, and promise never to speak to her unless it was absolutely necessary for work purposes. The coworker in question was a married mother of 3 children who looked exactly like someone's sweet aunt and had never shown even the slightest romantic interest in me or anyone else in the office. When I told Connor about this insane overreaction, he just stared at me with a mixture of disbelief and pity. After a long pause, he said, "Bro, your girlfriend is literally one cat and a government conspiracy theory away from being that crazy lady from Homeland. This level of paranoia isn't normal or healthy." I nearly choked on my drink because the comparison was so accurate it was frightening. Then there was the incident with my work promotion, which should have been a celebration but instead became another opportunity for Madison to show her true colors. When I got home from work excited to share the good news about my advancement and salary increase, her very first question wasn't, "Congratulations," or "I'm proud of you." Instead, she immediately asked, "So how much more money are you making now?" Before I could even tell her the specific number, she was already pulling out her phone to research vacation packages to Bali. and talking about upgrading to the latest iPhone model. She spent the entire evening planning ways to spend my raise without once acknowledging the hard work and dedication that had earned me the promotion in the first place. The surveillance didn't stop at social media monitoring. Madison also had a habit of accidentally checking my email whenever I left my laptop open around the apartment. One day, she found a message from a female client thanking me for resolving a technical issue that had been causing problems for her company. It was a standard professional thank you email that mentioned how much she appreciated my quick response and expertise in fixing their server problems. Madison went into full detective mode, treating this innocent work correspondence like evidence of a torrid affair. She spent hours Googling this woman's name, finding her LinkedIn profile and Instagram account, and building a case for why this constituted cheating. When she confronted me with her evidence, she was absolutely convinced that I was having an affair because the client had used an exclamation point in her email. According to Madison's twisted logic, professional enthusiasm was clearly a sign of romantic interest, and I was obviously encouraging this behavior by doing my job competently. The situation reached peak absurdity at my cousin's wedding, where Madison's jealousy and territorial behavior became a public spectacle that my family still talks about years later. My cousin's best friend Samantha, who I'd known casually for years, gave me a quick hello hug when we arrived at the reception. It was the most innocent greeting imaginable, a brief, friendly hug between family friends who hadn't seen each other in a while. Madison's response was swift and deliberate. She accidentally dumped an entire glass of fruit punch on Samantha's white dress, completely ruining the outfit and creating a massive scene in the middle of the reception. When I pulled Madison aside to ask what the hell she was thinking, she looked me straight in the eye and said, "I had to mark my territory. That girl needed to know you're taken." She wasn't joking or being dramatic. She was completely serious about having intentionally destroyed someone's clothing to assert dominance like some kind of deranged animal. My entire family was mortified by the incident, and my cousin still brings up the punch incident at every holiday gathering as an example of relationship drama gone wrong. The poor bride had to loan Samantha a change of clothes, and the whole thing overshadowed what should have been a joyful celebration. Connor was my +1 for the bachelor party and witnessed the entire punch-dumping spectacle firsthand. As we were driving home from the wedding, he turned to me with a perfectly straight face and said, "You realize you're dating the human equivalent of a chihuahua, right? Small, loud, and will attack anything that comes near what she thinks belongs to her." I nearly drove off the road because I was laughing so hard, but he wasn't wrong about the comparison. Madison's behavior was becoming increasingly erratic and possessive, and I was starting to feel like I was walking on eggshells in my own relationship. That wedding weekend ended up revealing so much more about Madison's true character than I had been willing to acknowledge before. She complained constantly throughout the entire event about everything she could possibly find fault with. According to her expert opinion, the venue was too basic and lacked the sophistication she expected from a proper wedding celebration. The food was too bland and clearly prepared by amateurs who didn't understand fine cuisine. Even my family members became targets of her criticism when they tried to make polite conversation with her. The so-called personal questions that bothered her so much were actually just my aunts asking basic, getting-to-know-you questions like, "What do you do for work?" It was a completely reasonable question that adults ask when meeting someone new. But Madison couldn't provide a coherent answer because she was between jobs for the 4th time that year. Instead of being honest about her employment situation, she got defensive and acted like my family was interrogating her for some nefarious purpose. Despite all these obvious red flags and increasingly problematic behavior, I stayed in the relationship because I had already invested so much time and emotional energy into making it work. When you've spent that much of your life with someone, you start convincing yourself that things will eventually improve if you just hang in there long enough. I kept telling myself that she was just going through a difficult phase in her life and that she'd eventually get her career figured out and become more stable. I rationalized her jealousy as passion and her financial dependence as temporary circumstances beyond her control. Looking back now, I can see that she wasn't passionate. She was just crazy and manipulative. And I wasn't being supportive and understanding. I was just being stupid and enabling her destructive behavior. But at the time, I was too deep in the situation to see it clearly. The way I finally caught Madison cheating was like something straight out of a movie. And I swear I'm not making any of this up. She had started this new routine where she claimed to be having regular girls' nights at her friend Chloe's apartment every Friday evening. According to Madison, these were wholesome gatherings where they did face masks, watched romantic comedies, and drank those expensive juice cleanse smoothies that were supposed to detoxify their systems. It sounded like typical basic girl activities, so I didn't question it or think anything suspicious was going on. Honestly, I was actually excited about having the apartment to myself on a regular basis. It meant I could order Chinese takeout without listening to complaints about the sodium content, play video games without commentary about how loud the sound effects were, and just relax without walking on eggshells around Madison's mood swings. This girls' night tradition had been going on for a couple of months, happening every Friday like clockwork. She'd pack her overnight bag with skincare products and comfortable pajamas, making a big show of how much she needed quality time with her female friends. In retrospect, the sudden interest in regular girls' nights should have been a massive red flag, especially considering that she used to complain constantly about these same friends. She'd always said that Chloe was too judgmental and critical about everyone's life choices, and that Jade was a drama queen who thrived on creating conflict and gossip. The fact that she suddenly wanted to spend every Friday night with people she had previously described as annoying and exhausting should have made me suspicious. But I was just happy to have some space and freedom. I decided to invite Connor over to take full advantage of this girlfriend-free zone and catch up on some serious gaming. We were several energy drinks deep into an intense Call of Duty session, completely destroying some kids online and having the time of our lives, when my phone buzzed with a notification around 3:30 in the morning. Connor and I shared our Apple Watch fitness data because we had this ongoing competition about who could be more active during the week. The notification that popped up on my screen said that Madison had just closed her exercise ring at 2:47 a.m., meaning she had burned enough calories to meet her daily fitness goal in the middle of what was supposed to be a relaxing sleepover. Connor glanced at my phone screen and immediately raised an eyebrow with a knowing look. "Unless face masks suddenly count as cardio," he said sarcastically. "Your girl's doing a very different kind of workout tonight." When I looked confused and didn't immediately understand what he was implying, he just sighed and spelled it out for me. "Dude, she's riding something, and it definitely isn't a Peloton bike." Now let me explain something crucial about Madison's relationship with physical exercise and activity. This was a girl who would literally call an Uber for a 3-block trip to the grocery store because she considered walking that distance to be unnecessarily strenuous. She genuinely believed that carrying shopping bags from the car to the apartment counted as strength training for the day. She had once complained to me that her Apple Watch was clearly malfunctioning because it refused to count her scrolling through TikTok videos as active movement worthy of exercise credit. So seeing her burn over 300 calories at 2:47 in the morning, during what was supposed to be a peaceful face mask session with her girlfriends, was immediately suspicious. Something definitely wasn't adding up with her story. I decided to test her story, so I sent Madison a text message saying, "Getting quite the workout in tonight, huh?" Her response came back within seconds, which was suspicious in itself since she was supposedly engaged in quality girl time with her friends. She replied, "Yeah, we're just dancing to 90s music and having fun, right?" Because nothing says relaxing sleepover like an intense cardio dance session at nearly 3 a.m. At this point, I was getting genuinely suspicious, so I decided to check the Find My iPhone feature to see if her location matched up with her story. When I opened the app, her location was nowhere near Chloe's apartment. Instead, she was showing up in some random residential area across town that I didn't recognize and had never been to before. I showed Connor the map on my phone, and he immediately zoomed in on the address to get a better look. He started laughing and shaking his head in disbelief. "Bro, what the hell? I know exactly whose place that is," he said, with a mixture of amusement and pity. "That's where that mall kiosk guy lives with his parents. You know, the one who fixed her phone a few months ago. I delivered Chinese food there last month when I was helping my cousin with his delivery route, so I remember the address perfectly." I sat there in stunned silence for several minutes, trying to process what was happening and what it meant for my relationship. The pieces were starting to fall into place in the most devastating way possible. Then I decided to dig a little deeper into her digital trail to see if there were other inconsistencies in her story. Her Instagram story from earlier that evening showed her supposedly at Chloe's apartment, complete with a timestamp that was posted hours before she actually arrived at this mystery location. It was clearly a scheduled alibi that she had planned in advance to cover her tracks. The level of premeditation involved in this deception was honestly impressive in its thoroughness, even though it was completely devastating to discover. I didn't even bother replying to her latest text message or confronting her about the location discrepancy. Instead, I just went back to gaming with Connor, who spent the rest of the night making increasingly ridiculous workout jokes to lighten the mood. "Hey man, pass me another Monster energy drink," he said with mock seriousness. "I need to close my caffeine ring tonight." His attempts at humor were actually helping me cope with the reality of what I was discovering about my relationship. When Madison came home the next morning, she had that unmistakable glow that comes from recent physical activity, if you know what I mean. She looked satisfied and smug, like she had gotten away with something clever and was proud of herself for pulling it off. Instead of playing games or pretending I didn't know what had happened, I simply showed her the screenshots of her Apple Watch activity and the Find My iPhone location data. The sequence of reactions that followed was like watching someone cycle through the stages of grief in fast forward. First came pure panic, as she realized she had been caught red-handed with undeniable evidence. Then came the desperate lies as she scrambled to create some plausible explanation for the inconsistencies in her story. Her first attempt was claiming that her Apple Watch must be glitching and recording false data, which was laughably weak even by her standards. When that didn't work, she tried to say that they had decided to go for a midnight walk around the neighborhood to get some fresh air and clear their heads. That explanation fell apart immediately when I pointed out that a casual walk wouldn't burn 300+ calories in such a short time period. Her third attempt was claiming that they had actually decided to go to Jade's place instead of staying at Chloe's, but she had forgotten to mention the change of plans to me. When I pulled up the address from Find My iPhone and showed her that it wasn't any of her friends' places, she finally realized that she was completely cornered with nowhere left to run. That's when she finally snapped and decided to come clean about what had really been happening during all those supposed girls' nights. "Fine. I was with Blake, and you know what?" she said, with a mixture of defiance and cruelty. "He satisfies me in ways you never could. I've been seeing him for weeks now, and you're so pathetic and oblivious that you didn't even notice what was happening right under your nose." Blake, as it turned out, was some loser who worked at one of those cell phone repair kiosks at the mall. This was the guy she was throwing away 9 years of our relationship for. The dude had been unemployed more often than he'd been employed over the past year, still lived in his parents' basement at 31 years old, and had an actual wall display of anime figurines that he treated like priceless art. That's who she had chosen to risk everything for. The most infuriating part of this whole revelation was that she had actually met Blake when I took her to get her phone screen repaired after she had cracked it by throwing it at me during one of her tantrums about her spending habits. I had even paid for the repair work, so I had technically funded their initial meeting and provided the opportunity for their affair to begin. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. That night, I called Connor immediately after Madison's confession, and he was at my apartment within 20 minutes carrying a box of energy drinks and absolutely zero sympathy for my situation. He had this way of cutting through emotional bullshit with brutal honesty that I desperately needed in that moment. While cracking open a can, he looked at me with a mixture of disbelief and dark humor and said, "So let me get this straight. You financed her affair by paying for her phone repair, and she met the guy she's cheating with through a service that you paid for. That's not just getting cucked, that's getting entrepreneured." Only Connor could find a way to make me laugh on literally the worst day of my life. His ability to find absurd humor in devastating situations was exactly what I needed to keep from completely falling apart. When Madison finally realized that I had actual proof of her affair and wasn't going to buy into any more of her elaborate lies, she didn't apologize or show any remorse for what she had done. Instead, she pulled the ultimate reverse psychology move and somehow managed to get mad at me for discovering her cheating. She started screaming about how I was invading her privacy by tracking her location, completely ignoring the fact that she had been the one who insisted we share our locations in the first place because she was worried about my safety and wanted to know where I was at all times. "You set me up," she yelled with genuine anger and indignation. "You knew I was unhappy in this relationship, and you drove me to seek comfort elsewhere." According to her twisted logic, I had somehow forced her to climb on top of mall kiosk boy by being an inadequate boyfriend who didn't meet her emotional and physical needs. But that was just the appetizer of entitlement. The main course of audacious demands was still coming, and it would blow my mind with its sheer absurdity. After her initial outburst of blame and accusations, Madison suddenly shifted tactics and became eerily calm and reasonable. "Look, we've been together for 9 years, she said in a measured tone, like she was presenting a rational business proposal. "People make mistakes, and relationships go through rough patches. I'm not planning to end things with Blake, though, because he gets me in ways that you never have. I think we should try an open relationship arrangement where we can both explore other connections while maintaining our primary partnership." I told her in no uncertain terms to pack her shit and get the hell out of my apartment immediately. That's when her sense of entitlement reached levels that I didn't even know were possible for a human being to achieve. "No, you should be the one to move out," she said with complete seriousness, like this was the most logical solution in the world. "My name is on the lease too, and I have nowhere else to go right now. Blake's parents' basement isn't big enough for both of us yet." She actually expected me to wait patiently until she and her affair partner found bigger accommodations for their love nest. "You can stay with your parents until we figure this whole situation out," she continued, as if this arrangement made perfect sense. "But you need to keep paying the rent here, and the utilities, and my phone bill, and all the other expenses I've gotten used to." Like I was supposed to financially support the apartment where she would be living with the guy she had been cheating on me with. I genuinely thought she was making some kind of elaborate joke or testing my reaction to see how much I would tolerate. She wasn't joking at all. "You can't just cut me off financially because I fell in love with someone else," she said, with the tone of someone explaining basic human rights. "That's financial abuse, and I've built my entire life around your income. I depend on your financial support to maintain my standard of living." That's when Connor, who had been suspiciously quiet in the kitchen and was probably texting updates about this insanity to our entire friend group, walked into the living room and started slow clapping like he was witnessing the performance of a lifetime. "Wow, that was an incredible performance," he said with mock admiration. "Is this from the same screenwriter who wrote Gone Girl? Or is this completely original delusion?" Madison was so enraged by his sarcasm that she actually threw one of her shoes at him, which he caught effortlessly like he had been expecting it. "And she's violent too," he announced to nobody in particular. "The full package, ladies and gentlemen." Madison then spent the next hour trying to explain how her cheating was somehow entirely my fault, and how I bore responsibility for driving her into the arms of another man. She claimed that I had emotionally neglected her by working late hours to pay for her shopping habits and lifestyle expenses. According to her reasoning, I had forced her to look elsewhere for emotional and physical satisfaction by not meeting her needs, which apparently included a new iPhone every 6 months and weekly spa treatments that cost more than most people's rent. The mental gymnastics continued as she explained that she deserved to be happy and shouldn't have to sacrifice her financial comfort just because our relationship dynamics were changing. This was rich coming from someone who hadn't contributed a single dollar to our household expenses in over 2 years and treated my bank account like her personal ATM. Then came what I thought would be the ultimate kicker. But Madison still had more surprises in store. She announced that she should get to keep my dog Nugget when she moved out. This was my dog that I had owned for 2 full years before Madison and I even met. The same dog that I walked 3 times a day in all kinds of weather, took to every single vet appointment, and paid every medical bill for. Nugget literally only responded to my commands in training because Madison couldn't be bothered to help with any aspect of his care or development. Her version of taking care of Nugget consisted of occasionally putting food in his bowl when I was running late from work. And even then she'd forget to do it half the time, leaving him hungry until I got home. Her reasoning for why she deserved custody was that Nugget knew her routine better and wouldn't adjust well to living in a new place with different schedules and expectations. She actually said with a completely straight face, "You can come visit him on weekends if you want to see him, but you'll need to check with Blake first to make sure it's a good time for everyone involved. And obviously, you'll still need to cover all of his expenses, vet bills, food, and everything else he needs, since I can't afford those kinds of costs right now." Connor actually spit out his drink at this point because the audacity was so overwhelming. "I'm sorry, did you just try to negotiate custody of his dog that you completely ignore, while also casually mentioning that you're planning to move in with Anime Boy?" he said with genuine amazement. "That's not just clown behavior anymore. That's the entire damn circus performing under the big top." When I refused her ridiculous demand about Nugget, Madison looked genuinely shocked and confused, like the concept of consequences for her actions was completely foreign to her worldview. "But what am I supposed to do?" she wailed dramatically, as if I was sentencing her to death instead of expecting her to function like an actual adult. "Get a job, pay your own bills, and take care of yourself like every other grown person in the world," I suggested, which seemed like pretty reasonable advice for a 29-year-old woman. She immediately burst into tears and accused me of being cruel and heartless after everything she had supposedly done for me over the years. To this day, I'm still trying to figure out what exactly she thought she had contributed to our relationship, besides draining my bank account and giving me trust issues that would take years of therapy to resolve. As she stormed out of the room in a dramatic huff, Connor turned to me and said with his trademark dry humor, "You know, after 9 years with her, you still have both kidneys intact. Consider yourself lucky, man." But the Entitlement Express wasn't finished running yet. Madison had even more outrageous demands that would make your head spin with their sheer audacity. She actually had the nerve to demand that I give her half of my savings account because, according to her reasoning, she had contributed to my professional success by supporting my career over the years. Her idea of career support apparently consisted of occasionally telling me good luck before important meetings, while simultaneously texting me links to expensive items she wanted me to purchase for her throughout the day. She also insisted that I should give her my PlayStation because she claimed to use it more than I did. The reality was that she only used it to watch Netflix, never actually played any games, and constantly complained about how loud the sound effects were when I was trying to relax after work. She wanted my laptop too, because she needed it for job applications. Despite the fact that she had barely applied to any jobs in the past 6 months and spent most of her computer time shopping online or scrolling through social media, when I refused these additional ridiculous demands, she tried to guilt-trip me by saying that I was being financially controlling and preventing her from becoming independent and self-sufficient. The irony of this accusation was completely lost on her, considering that she had been entirely financially dependent on me for years and had made zero effort to develop any independence or self-sufficiency skills. I gave Madison exactly 72 hours to pack her belongings and get out of my apartment. Those 3 days turned into absolute chaos that made the previous drama look like a peaceful negotiation. Her friends Chloe and Jade showed up to provide what they called emotional support during this supposedly traumatic time. Yes, they actually used those exact words, like Madison was the victim in this situation, rather than the person who had been cheating and lying for months. It turns out that these two had been actively covering for Madison's affair for weeks, helping her create fake alibis and cover stories to hide her cheating. They had been creating fake Instagram stories to make it look like Madison was spending time with them when she was actually with Blake. They had even answered text messages from her phone a few times when she was too busy with her affair partner to respond to me herself. With friends like these, who needs enemies? Chloe, who was about 5'2" and had one of those vocal fry voices that could literally shatter glass, actually cornered me in my own kitchen and had the audacity to lecture me about my relationship choices. "You should be grateful that Madison even stayed with you for as long as she did," she said, with the tone of someone explaining basic facts to a child. "Do you have any idea how many guys have been pursuing her over the years? She chose to give you 9 years of her life. Do you know how much money her other options make? That investment banker from her yoga class drives a Porsche." Connor, who had refused to leave me alone with what he had started calling the coven, popped his head into the kitchen from the living room where he had been eavesdropping. "If these other guys were such amazing options, why did they all pass on actually dating her?" he asked with perfect logic. "It's like bragging about all the other colleges that rejected your application." Chloe looked like she wanted to stab him with her acrylic nails, but she couldn't come up with a good response to his point. Jade was somehow even worse than Chloe, in terms of entitlement and delusion. She had actually prepared a detailed spreadsheet listing all the things that Madison had supposedly done for me during our relationship, with dollar amounts assigned to each task like she was billing me for services rendered. "Listening to you talk about work problems, $200 per hour," was an actual line item on this insane document. I'm not making this up. She had calculated charges for basic relationship activities like remembering my birthday and occasionally cooking dinner, even though Madison's version of cooking usually resulted in burnt pasta and smoke alarms going off. Connor peered over Jade's shoulder at the spreadsheet and whistled with mock appreciation. "At those rates, she should owe Tyler about $6 million for putting up with her crazy behavior for 9 years, he said. "Want me to create a counter spreadsheet itemizing the cost of her financial abuse and emotional manipulation?" Jade immediately slammed her laptop shut, clearly not wanting to engage in that particular mathematical exercise. While I was at work during those 3 days, Madison and her accomplices helped themselves to packing up her belongings, making sure to accidentally break several of my valuable possessions in the process. My signed baseball card collection, which had taken me years to build and was worth several $1,000s, mysteriously suffered water damage that destroyed the protective cases and ruined the cards themselves. My gaming PC, which I had built from scratch and invested considerable money in upgrading, suddenly experienced a power surge that fried the expensive graphics card I had just installed. They also made brazen attempts to steal items that clearly weren't Madison's to take. They tried to pack up my PlayStation, my laptop, and even a vintage watch that my grandfather had left me when he passed away. When I confronted them about these items later, they claimed that these were gifts Madison had given to me, or that she deserved them as compensation for putting up with me for so many years. The level of entitlement and dishonesty was absolutely staggering. Thankfully, Connor worked from home and offered to supervise the packing process from my apartment to make sure they didn't steal everything I owned. Later, he told me some incredible stories about what he witnessed during those 3 days. He caught Jade trying to stuff my PS5 into her oversized tote bag, like it was a normal personal belonging she had every right to take. I told her that the PlayStation was actually mine and that I'd need to file a police report for theft if it went missing, Connor explained. It was funny how quickly she suddenly remembered that it wasn't Madison's property after all. Connor's presence didn't completely stop their thievery, but it definitely limited the scope of what they could get away with. They still managed to steal smaller but valuable items that were easier to conceal, like my expensive wireless earbuds, a couple of rare vintage game cartridges that were worth significant money to collectors, and somehow my entire collection of charging cables for various devices. It was petty theft, designed to inconvenience me as much as possible. The night before Madison was scheduled to move out permanently, she tried a completely different approach to manipulate me into letting her stay. She came into the bedroom wearing lingerie that I had never seen before, which had probably been purchased specifically for Blake's enjoyment. She was attempting to seduce me back into the relationship despite everything that had happened. "We can work through this whole situation," she purred in what she thought was a seductive voice. "I'll stop seeing Blake if you just let me stay here and we can go back to how things used to be. We have so much history together, and that has to count for something." When her attempted seduction failed to work and I remained unmoved by her performance, she immediately switched tactics and started making threats about destroying my reputation and career. "No one is going to believe your version of events over mine," she hissed with genuine malice. "I'll tell everyone that you were physically abusive and pushed me around. I'll contact your company and tell them you have a serious drinking problem that affects your work performance." That's when I reminded her about the security cameras I had installed throughout the apartment after we had experienced a break-in about a year earlier. The look of panic and realization that crossed her face when she remembered about the surveillance footage was absolutely priceless, and I honestly wish I had taken a picture to commemorate the moment. On the actual moving day, Blake showed up with his parents' minivan to help transport Madison's belongings to their new living arrangement. The guy couldn't even make eye contact with me and kept his gaze fixed firmly on the floor, like he was searching for his lost dignity somewhere down there. His body language screamed guilt and embarrassment, which was at least somewhat satisfying to witness. Blake was exactly what you would expect from someone who works at a mall kiosk and still lives with his parents at 31 years old. He was skinny with terrible posture, wearing an anime t-shirt that looked like it was one wash cycle away from completely disintegrating. When he finally spoke, it was to ask if we had any bubble wrap available, because he needed to protect his limited edition anime figurines that were apparently already being moved into Madison's new living space. Talk about having your priorities straight. Connor, who had insisted on being present for moral support and to make sure they didn't attempt any last-minute theft, greeted Blake with an overly enthusiastic handshake and said, "So you're the guy who fixes phones and relationships, huh? That's quite an impressive skill set you've got there." The best part of the entire moving day was when I overheard Blake's mom asking him a very practical question as they were loading the last of Madison's possessions into the van. "So where exactly is she going to sleep?" she asked with obvious concern. "Your bedroom doesn't have enough space for all of this stuff." And we didn't discuss expanding the living arrangements. As they finally pulled away from my apartment building, Nugget did this adorable little happy dance that I had never seen him perform before. He ran around the apartment in circles, grabbed his favorite chew toy, which had mysteriously disappeared several months earlier, and then jumped up onto the couch, which was something Madison had never allowed him to do because she was worried about dog hair on the furniture. Later, I found out from my neighbor that Madison had been keeping Nugget locked in his crate whenever I wasn't home, sometimes for hours at a time, which explained why he had been so destructive with her shoes and personal belongings. No wonder the poor guy seemed so much happier and more relaxed once she was gone. That night, Nugget, Connor, and I ordered a massive pizza with all the toppings Madison used to complain about, drank energy drinks and water for Nugget, and watched all 3 John Wick movies back to back. Connor raised his energy drink can in a toast and said, "Here's to Apple Watch fitness tracking, the real MVP of this entire breakup." I had never felt so free and relieved in my entire life. About a week after Madison had finally moved out, and I thought the nightmare was over, the real crazy behavior began to escalate to levels I didn't even know were possible. I received an email from her with the subject line, "Financial Settlement Proposal," which immediately made my blood pressure spike, because I knew it wasn't going to be anything reasonable or rational. Inside, the email was a detailed list of demands that read like the wish list of someone who had completely lost touch with reality. She was demanding 6 months of transitional income at my full salary rate because she claimed she had to quit her job due to the unsafe living environment I had created by forcing her to move out of the apartment. She wanted full reimbursement for her investment in our relationship, which included every single gift she had ever bought me over the years, calculated with interest and inflation adjustments. The list continued with a demand for $12,000 in compensation for psychological damages caused by what she called the abrupt termination of financial support without proper notice. She also wanted continued health insurance coverage under my company plan for at least a full year, plus a monthly stipend for Nugget's care and veterinary expenses, despite the fact that Nugget was living with me and she had no contact with him whatsoever. The email had clearly been written with significant input from Chloe and Jade, as it included phrases like emotional labor compensation and unpaid domestic contribution valuation, terms that came straight out of Jade's ridiculous spreadsheet from hell. The language was trying to sound legal and professional, but it was obvious that it had been crafted by people who had no understanding of how the real world actually works. I immediately forwarded the email to Connor, who called me within seconds of receiving it. "Bro, I've seen Nigerian prince scam emails that were more realistic and believable than this insanity," he said while laughing so hard he could barely speak. "Is she smoking bath salts? Because that's the only way this level of delusion makes any sense." My lawyer buddy Marco had basically the same reaction when I forwarded him the email for his professional opinion. "Is she smoking crack?" was his expert legal assessment of Madison's demands. It's always reassuring when multiple people independently arrive at the same conclusion about someone's mental state. Next, Madison actually had the audacity to contact my company's human resources department directly. She sent them a 3-page typed letter explaining how I had financially abused her by withdrawing financial support without proper warning or justification. She demanded that they settle with her for $90,000 to avoid a potential lawsuit for emotional damages and workplace harassment. The letter included a completely fabricated timeline of events where she claimed that she had sacrificed her own promising career opportunities to support mine, had contributed essential unpaid labor to my professional success through emotional support and domestic management, and had been promised lifelong financial security in exchange for her partnership and sacrifices. Absolutely nothing in her letter bore any resemblance to the truth of our relationship. My company's legal team shut down her harassment attempt immediately with a formal cease and desist warning, but not before my boss had to call me into his office for what turned out to be a surprisingly awkward conversation. Thankfully, he was actually pretty cool about the whole situation once I explained what was happening. "Look, man, we've all dated someone who turned out to be completely crazy," he said with understanding. "Just make sure you keep this drama completely away from the office environment, and we'll be fine." It was embarrassing to have my personal life spill over into my professional world, but at least my employer was reasonable about the situation. When I told Connor about the HR incident, he said with his trademark sarcasm, "You should send her a consulting invoice for teaching her the word litigation. That's probably the only marketable skill she's actually picked up during your 9 years together." Then came the social media blitz, which was like watching a coordinated propaganda campaign designed to destroy my reputation and relationships. Madison, Chloe, and Jade formed what Connor aptly described as a 3-headed monster of lies and manipulation. They systematically messaged everyone I knew: family members, friends, old classmates from college, co-workers, and somehow even managed to track down my dentist's contact information. They told everyone a completely different version of events where I had supposedly abandoned Madison after she got sick with a serious illness, even though she had never been sick at any point during our relationship. They claimed that I had stolen her inheritance money and spent it on gambling and other selfish pursuits, despite the fact that she had never received any inheritance from anyone. They spread rumors that I had a secret gambling addiction and had blown our wedding fund at casinos, even though we were never engaged and had never saved money for any wedding. The messages they sent to my family members were particularly cruel and designed to cause maximum damage to my relationships with people I cared about. Madison told my mom that I had developed a serious drug problem and needed an intervention before I destroyed my life completely. She told my sister that I had accumulated massive gambling debts and was in danger from loan sharks. Most outrageously, she told my elderly grandmother that I had been visiting prostitutes and engaging in other immoral behavior that would break her heart. It was like Madison was throwing every possible accusation at the wall to see what would stick and cause the most damage to my reputation and relationships. The level of vindictiveness and cruelty was honestly breathtaking in its scope and intensity. Thankfully, my family knew Madison well enough by that point to see right through her manipulative lies and character assassination attempts. They had witnessed her entitled behavior and financial dependence firsthand during family gatherings and holidays over the years. My sister's response to Madison's accusations was absolutely legendary and perfectly captured the family's sentiment about the situation. "The only addiction my brother has is putting up with your crazy ass for 9 years," she replied when Madison tried to spread rumors about my supposed drug problems. "Find a hobby that doesn't involve harassing our family." Connor, being the loyal friend that he is, started responding to people who reached out to him about these ridiculous rumors with a simple but effective message. "New phone, who dis?" Followed immediately by screenshots of Madison's actual text messages where she confessed to the affair and made her outrageous financial demands. This approach shut down the rumor mill pretty quickly, as people could see the real evidence of what had actually happened. Chloe and Jade backed up every single one of Madison's lies with their own fabricated stories and fake evidence. They created manipulated screenshots of text conversations with me that had never actually happened, making it look like I had said terrible things or made threats that were completely fictional. They even started a hashtag campaign called Cancel Tyler that was supposed to expose my alleged abuse and get me fired from my job. Fortunately, their social media campaign was a complete failure that only managed to get about 15 posts, mostly from fake accounts that they had created themselves for this specific purpose. The whole thing was so obviously manufactured and desperate that it actually made them look worse rather than damaging my reputation in any meaningful way. When none of their online harassment tactics worked to destroy my life, they decided to escalate to real-world confrontation. Madison, Chloe, and Jade actually showed up at my workplace with handmade poster board signs that said things like, "Tyler is a financial abuser and justice for Madison." They set up what they thought was going to be an effective protest outside the main entrance to my office building. Security removed them after about 10 minutes because they were trespassing on private property and disrupting business operations. The whole spectacle was embarrassing for everyone involved, but especially for them since they looked like unhinged stalkers rather than legitimate protesters with a valid cause. Connor happened to be dropping off lunch for me that day. He had been weirdly protective and supportive since the breakup, making sure I was eating properly and taking care of myself. He witnessed the entire protest scene unfold and later told me it was like watching a car accident in slow motion. He waited until security was escorting the three of them off the property, then shouted across the lobby loud enough for everyone to hear, "Hey Madison, your sign has a typo. It should say Tyler refused to finance my abuse." I nearly died of embarrassment because my coworkers and clients were witnessing this circus. But the security guards were actually cracking up at Connor's perfectly timed comeback. Even some of my colleagues later said they thought his response was brilliant. After the failed protest stunt, Madison escalated her harassment campaign even further into genuinely frightening territory. She somehow managed to get my new phone number, probably from a mutual friend who didn't understand the full situation and thought they were helping facilitate some kind of reconciliation. She started bombarding me with text messages that alternated between threatening my safety and career and tearful pleas for me to take her back and forgive her mistakes. One minute she was promising to ruin my life and make me regret ever crossing her, and the next minute she was declaring that she was still deeply in love with me and wanted to work things out so we could be happy together again. The emotional whiplash was exhausting and honestly pretty scary, because I never knew which version of Madison I was going to encounter. When I blocked her phone number, she immediately created multiple fake social media accounts to continue messaging me through Instagram, Facebook, and even LinkedIn. When I blocked those accounts as well, she started creating new email addresses and sending me increasingly unhinged messages with subject lines like, "You can't escape me," and "You'll regret this forever." The level of obsession and stalking behavior was genuinely disturbing. She also began showing up at my apartment building at random times, pounding on my door and screaming, until neighbors threatened to call the police about the noise disturbance. The most terrifying incident happened when she actually climbed onto my balcony from the fire escape at 2:30 in the morning, setting off my security system and scaring the hell out of poor Nugget, who started barking frantically at the unexpected intrusion. That's when I decided it was time to stop being passive and defensive and start taking proactive measures to shut down this harassment campaign once and for all. As Rorschach says in Watchmen, "I'm not locked in here with you. You're locked in here with me." It was time to go on the offensive. First, I methodically gathered all the evidence of Madison's increasingly unhinged behavior over the past several weeks. This included screenshots of her threatening text messages, documentation of the fake social media posts and harassment campaigns, recordings of her screaming outside my apartment, and security camera footage of her trespassing on my balcony at 2:30 in the morning. I made multiple copies of everything and stored them in a secure cloud folder so I would have comprehensive documentation of her stalking and harassment. Then I decided to make some strategic moves that would hit her where it hurt most: her living situation and financial stability. I contacted Blake's parents directly and sent them the complete documentation of Madison's behavior since the breakup. This included the emails where she had demanded that I continue paying all of her bills while she was living with their son, the evidence of her harassment campaign against me and my family, and the proof of her stalking and trespassing behavior. I also included screenshots of text messages that I had found from an old backup of Madison's phone on my computer. She had used my laptop to back up her phone data once and never bothered to delete the files afterward. The text messages Madison had sent to her friends about Blake's parents were absolutely brutal and revealed her true feelings about the people who were graciously housing her. "His mom is such a controlling bitch and their house smells like mothballs and disappointment," read one particularly charming message. "I can't believe I'm stuck in this pathetic loser's basement until Tyler comes to his senses and takes me back. This whole situation is beneath me." Apparently, Blake's parents weren't thrilled to learn about Madison's true character and her complete lack of gratitude for their hospitality. They also weren't happy to discover that she was planning to use their home as a temporary base while she continued to harass and stalk her ex-boyfriend. They gave Blake an ultimatum. Either Madison had to go, or he would be losing his rent-free living situation in their basement. Connor added his own brilliant touch to this strategy by suggesting that I send Blake's parents an itemized bill for all the belongings that Madison had stolen or deliberately broken during her move-out process. "Tell them that their son's girlfriend has expensive taste in other people's property," he advised. I followed his suggestion, and amazingly, Blake's parents actually sent me a check covering about half of the damages. I had to respect their integrity and willingness to take responsibility for their son's poor choices. Next, I reported Madison to the credit card companies for the extensive fraud she had committed during our relationship. I had let these unauthorized charges slide while we were together because I was trying to keep the peace and avoid constant arguments about money. But now I filed formal fraud reports with comprehensive documentation of every transaction she had made without my permission. Going through my credit card statements with fresh eyes, I discovered that the fraud was far more extensive than I had initially realized. There were dozens of charges I had never authorized, including online shopping sprees, random cash advances, and even a weekend spa retreat that she had told me was paid for by her mother as a birthday gift. All told, Madison had fraudulently charged over $8,500 across 3 different credit cards. Her already questionable credit score tanked overnight when the credit card companies started investigating and reversing the fraudulent charges. I also contacted Madison's new workplace, where she had finally managed to get a receptionist job at a high-end hair salon. I didn't say anything negative about her character or job performance. I didn't need to. I simply asked them to update their employment records because Madison was no longer authorized to use my health insurance plan or list me as her emergency contact for any workplace incidents. The salon manager became curious about the situation and started asking questions about why I was removing Madison from my insurance and emergency contact information. When I casually mentioned that I was in the process of filing a restraining order against her for stalking and harassment, the manager's eyes got wide with concern. "We don't need that kind of drama and liability in our workplace," she said with obvious alarm. Madison was let go from her job the very next day. Connor thought this was a particularly elegant move on my part. "That's chess, not checkers," he said with genuine admiration. "You didn't even have to lie or say anything malicious about her. You just gave her enough rope and she hung her own career with her reputation. Remember Samantha, my cousin's friend who had gotten the fruit punch accidentally dumped on her white dress at the wedding? It turned out that she was an attorney who specialized in harassment and stalking cases. She had been following the situation through family conversations and offered to help me file for a comprehensive restraining order against Madison, Chloe, and Jade. With the mountain of evidence I had collected over the past several weeks, Samantha was able to build an airtight case for a 3-year restraining order that would prohibit all contact whatsoever and require them to maintain a minimum distance of 500 feet from me, my home, and my workplace. The restraining order hearing was absolutely something to behold. Madison showed up to court thinking she could charm the judge with the same tears and emotional manipulation tactics that had worked on me for years. Instead, She encountered a no-nonsense older female judge who had obviously seen this type of manipulative behavior countless times before. The judge cut Madison off mid-sob and said sternly, "Miss, this court operates on evidence, not emotion, and the evidence against you is substantial and concerning." When Madison tried to interrupt with more excuses and sob stories, the judge simply said, "One more word out of turn and I'll hold you in contempt of court." I had never seen Madison shut up so quickly in the entire 9 years I had known her. Connor had accompanied me to court for moral support and was sitting in the gallery trying not to laugh at the proceedings. He whispered to me, "Look at you, getting the government involved in your breakup drama. That's like calling in an airstrike on a mosquito." Then he added with a grin, "A really psychotic, financially draining mosquito that needed to be eliminated." The final move in my strategic campaign was creating a comprehensive website that documented every single piece of evidence and incident from Madison's harassment campaign. I didn't publish this website publicly, because that would have been stooping to her level of petty vindictiveness. Instead, I kept it private and sent the link directly to Madison with a single, simple message. In case you're wondering why no one believes your lies anymore. The website was professionally organized and presented like a legal case file, with everything arranged in chronological order from the first red flags in our relationship to the final restraining order hearing. Connor helped me with the technical aspects and coding, adding some sophisticated design elements that made it look extremely professional and credible. "It's like LinkedIn," Connor explained while we were working on it. But instead of showcasing work experience and professional achievements, it's a comprehensive catalog of batshit crazy behavior and manipulation tactics. The man definitely had a way with words. The website included a detailed financial section that calculated exactly how much money Madison had cost me over the years of our relationship. Over $180,000 when all the expenses, stolen items, and fraudulent charges were properly tallied. There was a complete timeline of her infidelity with supporting evidence, comprehensive documentation of her post-breakup harassment campaign, with screenshots and recordings, and copies of all her threatening messages and outrageous financial demands. It was basically a digital paper trail that proved every single claim I had made about her behavior, using evidence that she had created herself through her own actions and communications. I didn't have to embellish or exaggerate anything. I just had to present the facts in an organized, professional format. Within a week of sending Madison the website link, Blake had kicked her out of his parents' basement. Her latest job at the salon was gone, thanks to her reputation for drama and instability. Her credit score was completely destroyed due to the fraud investigations. The restraining order meant she couldn't come anywhere near me, my home, or my workplace. And everyone in our mutual social circle had seen the receipts of her actual behavior. So her smear campaign had completely backfired. The most satisfying part was that I didn't have to lie, manipulate, or make up anything to achieve these results. I simply showed people who Madison really was, using evidence she had provided herself through her own choices and actions. As Captain America would say, "I can do this all day." It took a few weeks for Madison's carefully constructed new life to completely implode under the weight of her own behavior and choices. Blake had dumped her after his parents threatened to cut off their financial support if he continued the relationship. She was couch surfing between Chloe and Jade's apartments, but even they were getting tired of housing someone whose presence was damaging their own reputations due to the restraining order situation. That's when the messages started trickling in through mutual friends who still didn't fully understand what had happened. "Madison's really struggling right now, and she's genuinely sorry for everything that went wrong," they would say. "She's been crying for days and feels terrible about how things ended. Can't you just talk to her and maybe work something out?" I ignored every single one of these messages completely. As far as I was concerned, Madison no longer existed in my world, and I had no intention of engaging with her manipulation tactics through intermediaries. Connor, who was also receiving these guilt trip messages, had developed a standard response that he used consistently. "New phone. Who dis? Just kidding. I know exactly who this is and why you're messaging me. The answer is still absolutely not." Then he would immediately block whoever had contacted him. Then came what I knew would be Madison's most desperate and manipulative attempt to reinsert herself into my life: the fake pregnancy claim. One night around 11:30 p.m., I received a barrage of text messages from a phone number I didn't recognize. "I'm pregnant, and it's definitely yours," the first message read. "You need to step up and take responsibility for your child. Blake left me when he found out, and I can't handle this situation alone. Your baby needs you to do the right thing." I responded with exactly 2 words: paternity test. When I showed the pregnancy text to Connor the next morning, he nearly fell off his chair laughing so hard he could barely breathe. "Pregnant with what, Audacity?" he gasped between fits of laughter. "Because that's the only thing she's actually full of right now." Then he got more serious and added, "Document everything, bro. This is definitely a restraining order violation, and we need to keep track of every contact attempt." That's when Madison decided to go completely nuclear with her manipulation attempts. She showed up at my apartment building at 2:30 in the morning, pounding on my door and screaming at the top of her lungs that I was abandoning my child and shirking my responsibilities as a father. My Ring doorbell security system captured the entire meltdown in perfect 4K resolution, which would later become crucial evidence. Poor Nugget was barking his head off at all the commotion, clearly stressed and confused by the noise and drama. When I refused to open the door or engage with her theatrics, Madison sent me what could only be described as a novel-length text message that I immediately screenshot for documentation purposes. "We were together for 9 years, Tyler," the message began. "It makes much more sense for you to help raise this baby than for anyone else to take responsibility. Blake is gone now, but you have a stable job and a secure home environment. Who cares about the actual biology? You owe me this much after everything I sacrificed for you during our relationship. The least you could do is help me raise this child." The text message continued with Madison explaining her detailed plan for how this arrangement would work. I would provide financial support for her and the baby, she would continue living in my apartment, and we would co-parent together while she figured out her long-term career goals. She even suggested that Blake could visit on weekends since he was technically the biological father. But that shouldn't interfere with my primary responsibility as the financial provider. The level of delusion and entitlement was reaching heights that I didn't think were humanly possible. I remained absolutely firm about requiring a paternity test before any discussion of responsibility could even begin. Madison alternated between sob stories and direct threats for several weeks, but when she finally realized that I wasn't going to budge on this requirement, she reluctantly agreed to the testing. The results came back exactly as I expected. Not my child. In fact, the timing of the pregnancy made it impossible for me to be the father, since we hadn't been intimate for several months before our breakup. It should have been another red flag about the state of our relationship, but hindsight is always 20/20. When the paternity results were officially confirmed, Connor suggested that we should celebrate this outcome like a national holiday. Not being the father should be Christmas, your birthday, and Independence Day, all wrapped into one massive celebration, he declared. It's like winning the lottery, but instead of gaining millions of dollars, you're avoiding decades of financial obligation to a psychotic person. The day after the paternity results were officially confirmed, I received an email from Madison that honestly made me feel a tiny bit of pity for her situation, despite everything she had put me through. She had clearly lost everything and was facing the consequences of her choices for the first time in her adult life. Blake had dumped her when the pregnancy drama started. Her job at the salon was gone due to her reputation for creating workplace drama. Her friends Chloe and Jade were distancing themselves from her because their own reputations were taking hits due to their association with the restraining order situation. She was 3 months behind on her credit card payments and facing eviction from the cramped studio apartment she had managed to rent after being kicked out of Blake's parents' basement. "I've hit rock bottom," she wrote, in what was surprisingly humble language for Madison. "I have nowhere else to turn, and I know I screwed up everything between us, but I genuinely can't handle this situation alone anymore. I need your help just to get back on my feet and stabilize my life. I promise I'll pay you back every penny once I get established again. Please, Tyler, for the 9 years we had together and all the good times we shared, I'm literally begging you to help me through this crisis." The email was surprisingly humble and vulnerable compared to Madison's usual entitled demands and manipulative tactics. A year earlier, this approach would have worked completely, and I would have immediately sent her money while believing all her promises about changing her behavior and paying me back once she got her life together. But I was a fundamentally different person now. 9 years of manipulation, financial abuse, and emotional torture had finally taught me something valuable about setting boundaries and protecting myself from toxic people. I considered helping her for about half a second before remembering all the hell she had put me through during and after our relationship. Instead of sending money or offering financial assistance, I sent her comprehensive information about local women's shelters, food banks, job placement services, and other community resources that could help her get back on her feet through her own efforts. These were legitimate resources that could provide the support she needed if she was willing to do the work required to rebuild her life. Her response to my practical suggestions was predictably entitled and revealed that she still hadn't learned anything from her experiences. "After everything we've been through together, that's all you can offer me," she wrote with obvious anger and disappointment. "Charity links and homeless shelter information? You know I can't live like that. I'm not some desperate homeless person who belongs in those kinds of places. You're just being vindictive and cruel because you want to punish me." That's when I realized that Madison still fundamentally didn't understand what had happened or why her life had fallen apart so completely. She still believed that she was entitled to my financial support and assistance, despite having betrayed me in every possible way and then spending months trying to destroy my life through harassment and stalking. She still thought she deserved special treatment and was above the normal consequences that other people face when they make terrible choices. The concept of personal responsibility and accountability was completely foreign to her worldview, even when she was facing homelessness and financial ruin. I blocked her new email address, filed her message under spam, and updated the restraining order documentation with evidence of her latest contact attempts. I was done enabling her delusions and entitlement. It's been about a year since all of this insanity finally came to an end, and my life has improved in ways that I never could have imagined while I was trapped in that toxic relationship. The financial and emotional freedom that came from cutting Madison out of my life completely transformed my circumstances and mental health. I got the promotion at work that I had been working toward for months. Without the constant stress and drama of Madison's financial demands and emotional manipulation, I was able to focus properly on my career and professional development for the first time in years. My performance improved dramatically when I wasn't constantly distracted by relationship chaos and financial stress. My personal finances recovered incredibly quickly once I stopped funding Madison's lifestyle and shopping habits. Within 6 months of the breakup, I had completely paid off all the credit card debt that had accumulated during our relationship. I was able to start properly funding my 401k retirement account for the first time in years, and I even managed to save enough money for a down payment on a small house with a fenced yard where Nugget could run around and play safely. The house purchase was particularly meaningful because it represented true independence and stability that I had never been able to achieve while supporting Madison's expensive tastes and financial irresponsibility. Having my own space that couldn't be invaded or controlled by someone else felt incredibly liberating. And remember Samantha, my cousin's friend who had helped me with the restraining order legal work? We started dating about 6 months after the Madison nightmare finally ended. It turned out that she had always been interested in me romantically, but had respected my relationship and never acted on her feelings while I was committed to someone else. Samantha was everything that Madison wasn't: intelligent, successful, financially independent, and completely drama-free. She had her own thriving law practice, paid for all of her own expenses, and never once tried to check my phone or accuse me of cheating when I interacted with female colleagues or friends. She treated Nugget like the king he deserved to be, buying him toys and taking him on long walks without being asked or expecting credit for basic kindness. We took the relationship slowly and carefully because I needed time to heal from the trauma of my previous experience. Dating Samantha made me realize just how toxic and abnormal my relationship with Madison had actually been. I hadn't understood what a healthy partnership was supposed to look like until I experienced one firsthand. Connor, of course, takes full credit for facilitating our relationship. I created the perfect romantic opening for you two by being such a terrible wingman that it made you look good by comparison, he jokes regularly. Plus, I provided comic relief during your darkest hour, which obviously made you more attractive to potential partners. While his logic is questionable, the truth is that Connor was absolutely my rock throughout this entire ordeal. His loyalty, humor, and practical support helped me survive the worst period of my adult life and come out stronger on the other side. Last I heard through the family grapevine, Madison had been forced to move back to her parents' house in another state because she couldn't support herself independently. The baby was born, and surprise, it wasn't Blake's child either. Apparently, there had been a third guy involved in the situation all along, which explained some of the timeline inconsistencies that never quite made sense.